Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. And very warm welcome on behalf of Goethe Institut, Land of Kolkata as well. We are really delighted to be a part of this Nabanna Weekend Festival 2020, and this is a great pleasure to welcome Peter Pannke, who has come all along the way from Germany to Santiniketan to join this event, but also to replenish his memories of Santiniketan, I think from the 90s. He's coming back from after 25 years to Santiniketan. Now, this publication has been possible with the help of the translation grant of Goethe Institut. So,
it's by Abdullah Al-Farooq, and the publication is by Sampark. And this is the original. Sorry, the original. Yeah. Singers died twice.
but the Bangla translation has been translated from the original German Sangit and so on.
You've talked about many of your musical influences, your favorites. You know, people like Muddy Waters and John Lee Hooker, Coltrane and Jimi Hendrix, both of whom use Indian chants, sounds, rhythms. But it isn't until you heard Imrat Hussain Kasab perform that the power of Hindustani classical music really got to you. And it was Alain, I think, who introduced you to the Dhrupad. Now, I just wanted to ask you to take us through your journey from your comparative musicology to this world of Indian classical music. And I just wanted to read out a line which I've marked out here, which I found very telling. You've talked about the power of the Dhrupad, and you've drawn an analogy here about Billie Holiday. She cut her heart out quite open. That was it. She stripped herself, showing her naked soul. So, tell us about that journey.
Before I do that, can you hear me?
Yes.
Is this okay? Before I start to answer your question, let me thank this wonderful festival, and also my thanks to Mueller Bhavan and to my old friend Pathe, who is accompanying me here, and for the wonderful chance to have this book also released in Bengali. So, coming to your question is that you have to see that I'm a child of the 60s. I mean, I was born in 46, right after the war, but it was like when I was 20 in 66, 67, 21. So this was the time when, for the first time, after a very long period, India became known, or India approached Europe in a very different way, because we had the long break, and cultural break with the fascists and with Hitler and all these cultural barbarians. And it was, that was after the war. Germany was still very isolated from other cultures, and it took really the Vietnam War and the protest against the Vietnam War to make people aware that there are other cultures around. And so India came really to Europe in the form of LPs. I mean, Tagore, Rabindranath Tagore was there in the late 20s in Germany, and he still, I mean, he raised a lot of attention in the Berlin, but this was before Hitler and the war. But then there was a cultural break. I mean, our culture was really destroyed, And after the war, there was like a cultural wasteland. And it was only in the 60s, middle of the 60s, that Ali Akbar Khan and the Beatles and Ravi Shankar came to as ambassadors of that. And along with them, so the first LP I heard, Indian LP I heard was Ali Akbar Khan. There was, at that time there were no CDs, there were LPs. And this was, an LP had a duration of 30 minutes on each side, or 25 something. So it was quite a sensation. On the cover it said, this is the 40 minutes raga, and he played Marwa on that. And never before a whole record had been devoted to a single piece of music. So a new cultural concept made itself known. And so when I listened to this, I was really awestruck by the depth of the sounds and all that. And then shortly after that, the Alain Danielou, the first European who actually practically studied Indian music in the 30s and 40s, he had invited, he had invited the other Dagar brothers to Berlin. And he had recorded them, and he published the first LP of the Dhrupad. And I listened to listening to the voice of Zia Mueller Dagar, Nasir Mueller Dagar. This impressed me so much. I'd been really brought up on blues, and as you mentioned, Billie Holiday and German folk songs. I was always very much after the singing voice. And so when I heard that, I made my mind up that I should meet these people and find out how they do these amazing sounds. And so I set out to India, and I went overland, hitchhiking overland to India. So this became a very adventurous trip, and part of that is mentioned in that book. So my book is really, it's not musicology. You know, musicology there are many ways to talk about music, and musicology is only interesting to musicians or musicologists. And I'm basically sitting in front of you here as a novelist. And when I talk about music, I think I don't want to explain the techniques or whatever of music, because that's interesting only for people who do music. But what interests people are stories, and the life stories of these absolutely amazing people I spent time with and many years. So when my last guru, Bidu Mallik, died, I went to India to attend his the last rites in the village of Amta.
And so
difficulty. This is, yes, a great, because Bihar was underwater, and so it was an adventurous trip. And so I wrote this book actually in his memory, recalling all my memories of his family, of how and so on. So it's many stories weaved into one, but it's actually literature, it's not musicology.
I'm going to come back to the gurus, but I want to ask Ranjani now. And I'm going to come back to your journey into music later. But there's a specific question I want to ask you. Peter has talked at length about Dhrupad. I read out just a few lines, and he's called it unalterable verse. But what is really interesting is that he said it can only be sung by men. Now you have studied under people like Vidushi, Girja Devi, Vidushi, Veena, Shahasrabudhe. Do you think it's still like that? Has it changed? You're not a Dhrupad singer, I know, but...
First, let me also thank the organizers of this festival. It's wonderful to be part of this. Thank you. Actually, now, you know, this notion that a particular form is not for women. I think it's outdated in the sense. I think every form can be interpreted in the way that a person wants to.
So is it being done?
It is. Now there are enough, there are the Gundecha Bandhus who are actually training a large number of female musicians. In fact, one of my Guru Bahens, she used to learn from Veena Sahasrabudhe. And a few years back, she was just attracted towards Dhrupad form. And then she shifted to Bhopal and started learning from the Gundecha Bandhus. So I see a lot of women instrumentalists also, I mean, as far as Dhrupad is concerned. And Khayal has had a very, very long history of female practitioners, starting with the courtesans. Yeah, courtesans also, because they have a very big contribution in developing the Khayal form, like Kesarbai Kelkar, Mogubai Kurlikar, all these people have actually reinterpreted many notions of the gharana itself and have inspired generations of women musicians. So,
okay. You know, I said I'd come back to you about the gurus. You've learned from a number of people. You've been really lucky. And you've also said that somebody like Pandit Vidur Mallik was incredibly generous, unlike a lot of gurus who want to hang on to their knowledge, who don't want to pass it on to the next generation. What is it that you gained from each of your gurus, be it Pandit Ramachandran Mallik, Pandit Vidur Mallik? In short, what made each one special? What made each one different? I know we can take an entire day.
Yes.
But we have only 40 now we have 40.
Let me just come back to your remarks. Actually, it's not at all my opinion that Dhrupad should be sung only by men. It's an open form, but it came into being, you know, Dhrupad actually was like the soundtrack of the Bhakti movement of the 15th century, and it was performed by these singer-poets like Surdas and Nandadas and all these people who, and then Daastaan and so on. So it came into being as a male form, and it has also a relationship to the male voice. I mean, going to the deeper registers and stuff.
You were stating a fact.
You know, this would be a very long topic for discussion about Dhrupad and women and so on. It's a very interesting topic, but it's much too specialized for that. So now to come to your question, the short answer to that, very short answer is read my book. because you see, writing books is, actually I'm a storyteller. So I like to tell stories to my friends and to people, and then there comes a point when the stories become too long to tell it in a single setting or in a single evening, and that's the point where I have to start to write a book, because the story is really too long to recount it just in 50 minutes, not to say, you know. So, I mean, what I gained from all my gurus is really immense, and it wouldn't really need a long description, but it has been very important for shaping who I am, you know, and that's, so it cannot be put into a short answer.
Okay, let me just ask you one thing, that out of the two main ones who impacted on you, Guru Pandit Ramachandran Mallik and Pandit Vidur Mallik, how were they different? Were they?
I was attracted to India by listening to the voice of Nasir Muinuddin Dagar, and then and at that time when Danielu published that, he was under the impression that Dhrupad has already died. And so I was trying to find the last traces, and at the first Dhrupad Mela on Tulsighat, which happened in '75 when I was studying at BHU, I found out that actually there are hundreds and hundreds of Dhrupad musicians all over in North India, and they were, so Dhrupad actually has been preserved in many temples and many courts and places. The only problem was that no Western musicologist ever went to Dabanga to find out who was there. So it was a revelation to me to see that what an immense wealth of Dhrupad is here. And I found out that really the towering figure at that point of time was really Ramachandran Mallik, who was called the Dhrupad Samrat, and he had spent his life at the court of Nabanna mostly, and and he was above 80 when I met him, so I spent some years with him because I figured that I never would again meet such an impressive person in my life. And so since then, now I've been with that Mallik family since 5 generations of musicians, and every person and every generation is really different. So the music is also changing, and to observe that and how to differentiate that, again, you have to. That is would be a very long answer, but there are changes all the time. And music doesn't only change in generations, but each year something new is coming up.
Okay, Ranjani, I told you I would ask you about your journey into music. What made you take up what you did? Now, you're from the south, you're from Andhra, from Chennai. So it's like, you know, why this style of music? What made you choose this? How did you take us through your journey a bit? And I also want to ask you something about the gurus. Peter's talked about the different gurus, the rivalries between the gurus and also the gharanas, and how the stories very often perpetuate that. Did you ever face that or see it?
Actually, I have to confess that whenever somebody asks me where you're from, it takes about a couple of seconds to answer, because I was born in Chennai, but I was entirely brought up in North India. My father was in IIT Kanpur, and so I was in the heartland. So very comfortable with Hindi, and it's almost like my first language. I also speak Tamil. But my mother is trained in both Carnatic and Hindustani music. And at that point in time, she was also taking classes of Hindustani music. She was training students at home. So there was a natural inclination towards Hindustani music. And I have to give credit to my parents that they've never imposed, the notion of language and culture on me. It was always about my choice. So there was this natural inclination towards Hindustani music, and I got initiated, started with my mother. And then I learned from her guru, Kashinath Bodas, whose father, incidentally, is Shankar Shripad Bodas, who was the direct disciple of Vishnu Digambar Paluske, who is considered one of the pioneers in propagating Hindustani music, throughout the country. So, and he belonged to the Gwalior Gharana. And I trained under Kashinath ji for a few years. Then I was in Pune. I was doing my higher studies, and I was with Veena Sahasrabudhe ji, again a very celebrated female Khayal vocalist of the same Gharana, but she was also of the same family, but she had a very distinctive style, So that's an interesting notion about Gharana, which I will talk about later. And when I was with Vinatai, I also had an opportunity to travel with her throughout the country as her vocal accompanist. And I think I consider this also as part of my musical training and journey. It's also part of your music education, that you work in close quarters with
your proximity and what you imbibe through it, of course.
And my next destination, so this was Maharashtra, and then I went to Calcutta. And no, actually I went to learn from Ulhas Kashalkarji. So there's this institution called Sangit Research Academy, which is probably one of the first modern day gurukuls in India, so to say, Why I call it? Because I think to institutionalize the training of music, such a specialized, personalized kind of practice, and to make an institution and then to have different practitioners under the same roof and also their students. I think it was one of the most successful experiments, and I went to learn. I got selected as a resident scholar. So I spent about 5 years with Ulhas Kasharkar ji. The story with Girija Devi ji is that my guru said, look, you're never going to have the chance to actually learn from a legend like Girija Devi so easily. She was like living next door. So he actually requested that please teach some of my students. And I think, these notions of rivalry, fortunately for me, I have never had, because of the gurus that I've had. I think they were the way that they were because they were also serious pedagogues. They were very serious teachers, which is a very rare combination, I find. You cannot, it's very rare to find a performer and a teacher in one single person, a very good guru. So I think they had that broad-mindedness. Veenatai's father always used to say in Hindi ki sabka acha dekho aur lene ki koshish karo. I mean, look at the good points in every musician and try to imbibe that. So, there were all these gurus of mine who belonged essentially to the Gwalior Gharana, but the Gharana in itself, I don't find it limiting, even for a contemporary musician in this time. I find that Gharana is basically a style, a gaiki, and you have to have your own individual expression within a Gharana. That's very important. Otherwise, there's no point just talking about a Gharana and talking about, practitioners who used to sing the way they did. Because if you are not going to have your own sort of an expression, I think there's no point ranting about, Gharana. So that notion, at least I have personally not felt, and my gurus have always encouraged to listen to everybody. And I mean, we are living in the digital age, okay? So you have the YouTube, which is like the biggest archive. You can find practitioners of all the Gharanas there. So a musician of this generation, and even earlier also, this notion of Gharana, Bhimsen Joshi used to love Kesarbai Kerkar's stans. He has quoted them, and this was a practice, this was regular practice. So, I don't know where this idea got perpetuated, and probably there are some people who are still very guarded. But I think in some sense the democratization of the teaching and dissemination of music in itself is one of the reasons why this rigidity of Gharana is no longer valid.
Thanks so much. I want to ask Peter something. You've talked about certain cities, Banaras, certain places, Darbhanga, Vrindavan, and it's always been in musical terms. For example, you start by saying Banaras is a percussionist city, and the citizens join in with their hammering, clattering, knocking, metal, chants on metal and tin, or thumps on rubber and wood, punctuated by human voices, bells, etc., etc. These cities that you've talked about, and your musical journey in each of them, it's been different. So take us through that a bit.
And I would like to continue with what you said about Sangit Research Academy. I've been also, we were collaborating, and I was there a lot in that must have been the 80s. But what happened, I was, like in the early 70s, there was a whole group of Westerners deeply interested in Indian music, and they sort of assembled on Asikhat, and most of them were in the music college of BHU. And the first Dhrupad Mela started from Tulsighat in Varanasi in 75. But soon after that, in 1980, there was the first Dhrupad Mela in Vrindavan. And I was living in Delhi at that time, and I was with the younger Dagar brothers. And so I went over to Vrindavan, and I saw in Radha Raman Mandir, there was an absolutely amazing Dhrupad festival with people which I had never seen before. And so I decided that I would move to Vrindavan because Radha Raman Mandir and Srivatsa Goswami, the head priest at the time, he had decided that to bring the British arts back to Vrindavan, and Dhrupad originated from Gwalior and then also from Vrindavan. And I had, with a group of other Westerners, we had access to some funds for the preservation of Indian art, sponsored by the Ford Foundation. And I was put in charge of doing a Dhrupad archive. And so I had a sum of money which I could use, and the scholars and those people who gave the money were under the impression that an archive should be developed and things put into an archive. But my point of view was and is, and even more than at that time, that the only way to preserve art is to put gurus and disciples in connection. And so I think it's, you can of course record music and put it on YouTube or whatever, but that's not the preservation of art. The only way to preserve art is to make it possible that a guru can teach a student, and the student would be in a position to pass it on. That's the only way you can preserve art. So, just to conclude that, I used the funds that I had to start a Dhrupad Gurukul in Vrindavan. And that is still working, and we had also Fahimuddin Dagar there and Zia Muhyiddin Dagar and so on. But the main teacher became Vidu Mallik, and that it became a long-standing association. So I totally agree with you that the idea of the Gurukul is something which is very important, and that's the way this music can be taught. People really, it's not enough to have a school or to have lessons. You really have to enable the teachers and the gurus and the disciples, shishyas, to live together. So I put that, this was the first Dhrupad Gurukul, and it started in 1980, and it's still existing. So this was long before the Gundechas, when they came to Vrindavan, they were 12 years old, you know, and they learned from us.
Okay, I was going to button to bring up a very telling example of what you just said, not in the field of music, but in the field of dance. Yes, it is so vital for art to stay alive by bringing gurus and students together, because Mallika Sarabhai does a certain kind of dance with her feet. She paints, and she was taught by her guru. She tried very hard to teach people. She hasn't even been able to teach her son perfectly. And her guru died. So she's terrified that once she dies, that art dies out with her. So really that is so important. Okay, Ranjani, you know, in his book, he's talked about something that we've all read about. It's the subject of folklore, legend. In the time of Akbar, Tansen, and there are other gurus who used to sing and invoke the rain or the heat, and they would succeed. But he's actually seen it happening. You've talked about it in your book. When the Maharaja brought these two brothers because they were going through drought, and in fact both of you can talk about it. They were going through drought, and they sang there on vines, and there was a deluge. So the power of music, how have you felt it? He's going to talk about that, because that is unbelievable, that people can still see that. What is the power of music for you? To bring people together, to make peace, to create harmony?
Yeah, I think music is very open-ended. The experience of music in itself, as I look at it, is very open-ended. So, you know, the same rag can actually invoke different feelings in different people. And you need not even be a initiated listener, you know, there are times spent, there are many people who come up and say that, you know, they were really moved by the bandish, even the text, you know. Although we know that this form is very improvisation heavy, It's not very textual, at least the Khayal is not.
No Indian
And yeah,
classical forms.
but even then, it's then definitely the phraseology and the way you are able to sing a particular phrase. It can be anything, and even in moments of performance, you find that you have that aha moment when you yourself are very happy at the way, you have come at the sum, which is like sort of the focal point. And I think it's a very subjective experience for
in fact, that is something, the subjective bit.
If I can add something to that, if you're interested in the modulation of the brain through sound, I think one of the best, like the frontier research these days was done by Oliver Sacks, and he wrote a book. He's a neurologist and very world famous, and he has a book on how sounds are shaping the brain, Alzheimer's disease and so on. And neurologists see all the time that people who have like completely lost their memory and their ability to speech, with sounds and with songs you can still reach them, because there is a particular way how sounds are, how the brain is responding to music. And so I don't want to put up the question, are there miracles possible through music? That's not the point. But actually, if you read the Oliver Sacks and what's done in research nowadays, this is really absolutely amazing. It may be even more amazing than just producing rain, but that's also, again,
that's pretty amazing.
Yes.
I think most of us who go to concerts probably dream that we're going to see it happening one day. And that was really amazing, yeah? Okay. Quickly, the last thing, very important, I just want to ask that. We don't have time, we're running out of time. So you mentioned the courtesans and you mentioned the zamindars in your book. Quick question, obviously fascinated by film also because you've drawn parallels with Shuddhajit Ray and George Agar, etc. The zamindars as sponsors, as people who patronize the arts, what was it like? They're a dead breed today. How are people surviving?
Music actually is being reborn every day new, and there is no question of music disappearing. Of course, the shape is changing all the time, and of course there are no zamindars as patrons now, and the art needs patrons, but basically it's you who are sitting here who are asked to be patrons of artists. As long as you recognize the worth of an artist performing for you, as long as that art and artists will survive. So it's really up to you. It's in your hands.
Okay, good note to end on and pass this on to the audience. Quick questions, anyone? Yes.
The form of art, and that you value that a guru and a student should live together. I understand that point as well. I appreciate that point as well. But my question is, YouTube may not be the method, but practically speaking, more and more parents are also not willing to give up their children or to send their child prodigy, especially, I'm sorry to say, in the era of Me Too. So what is a happy medium? How do I get to, imbibe this? If I want my child to learn a certain form of art or song or music or dance, what is that happy medium, do you think?
Actually, so that's a good source of information, but you can't learn that way. You can only learn by being in front of a human being, because music is a human art, and it's not a computer art, and it cannot be taught by institutions. I mean, real music. So you need to find a human being who is really inspiring you. And that's possible under all circumstances, you know, and there is no prescribed method for that. You just have to find somebody who really inspires you, and then you ask him to show you something about that. So, and that's...
But difficult today, in today's world, where there's so much that you need to do, to give up everything to the exclusion of all else, go and study a music form or a dance form.
I don't agree with that. No. Okay. It's not that you have to give up everything. Of course, I mean, my statement on that is that music is actually blossoming in India. There are so many fantastic musicians in India, and the upcoming generation of musicians is so inspiring and so wonderful that I would say music is really being reborn every day, and in many different forms. So I don't have this pessimistic view of music dying out and all that. That's not at all the case. Believe me, I listen to music every day, and I find the most inspiring musicians in the young generation in India.
That's fantastic.
Who teach music, I mean classical music, on Sunday, on Saturday, and that is, say, for 3 hours. But most important, that the student has to practice at home, because many students do not practice. Unless you have that as a passion, you cannot go forward. So, but there are many teachers, and you don't have to have a gurukul that you have to stay there, no?
Okay. One question, one hand there. Is that the last one, Anju? Yeah, okay.
From deep south.
Music is something which is happening in space, you know, and it's there is no, I don't make this strong distinction between like Western and Eastern music, because music is a way to express feelings. And music is the language in which you can transmit feelings. And no matter what the style is, if it would be jazz, or if it would be Dhrupad, or if it would be Sufi, Qawwali, or whatever, there is, it's always a transmission of feeling if it's true music. And I don't have a pessimistic view on that. I think music is really asserting itself all the time. And as you said, sir, of course, it's not, there has to be passion. If you really, without passion, you cannot learn music, but without passion, you cannot learn anything. Without passion, you also cannot learn astrophysics or medicine or whatever. There has to be a passion, otherwise you cannot learn anything. Because the idea that you can just put knowledge into other people's head and they just not and take it is not, it doesn't work like that. There has to be the passion on part of the receiver, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely, sir. But without passion, you can pass the exam. Without passion, you cannot excel.
And you can also be a musician without passing the exam.
I think if I got you right, Ananya's question was more about, is it difficult for, so to say, an outsider to practice? Well, you know, to be frank, I still, after about 25 years of singing this music, I still, people who don't know me, they still ask me, oh, how come you are singing Hindustani music? But I think those are just notions. Till you listen to the music, I think all the questions stop there, because it's more about, yes, there is definitely an outsider-insider thing, I know it very well. So, but then it's okay, if I'm an outsider everywhere, that's fine. Because music anyway is, generally in India, Maharashtrians and Bengalis have sort of dominated Hindustani music, you know, amongst the practitioners. So, but I also have the example of N. Rajam and any number of people. So, you know, I think it's more about how inspired you are, and it's also about the passion, and also the upbringing that you have had, like from a young age. So, yeah.
Thank you both.